Welcome to Exploration Dreamland, a quiet read-aloud of the writings of explorers of the real world and the worlds of imagination. Drop anchor, relax into your comfortable bunk, and drift off to Dreamland with us as we read an abridged version of MIZORA, a Prophecy by Mary E. Bradley, published in book form in 1889. The story will be read in order, so if you would like to begin at the beginning, please start with Season 2, Episode 16. If you would like to stay in touch between episodes, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Exploration Dreamland. If you would like to recommend a text, please email us at explorationdreamland, all one word, at gmail.com. You can also find our episodes on YouTube. Please subscribe or follow and review us wherever you find us. Your actions will help others find us too. Now, take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, relax any tension in your muscles. Close your eyes, snuggle into your sleeping space, and listen to tonight's tale. Chapter 3. I have been thus explicit in detailing the circumstances of my entrance into the land of MIZORA, or, in other words, the interior of the earth, lest some incredulous person might doubt the veracity of this narrative. It does seem a little astonishing that a woman should have fallen by accident and without intention or desire upon a discovery that explorers and scientists had for years searched for in vain. But such was the fact, and in generosity, I have endeavored to make my accident as serviceable to the world in general, and science in particular, as I could, by taking observations of the country, its climate and products, and especially its people. I met with the greatest difficulty in acquiring their language. Accustomed to the harsh dialect of the North, my voice was almost intractable in obtaining their melodious accentuation. It was, therefore, many months before I mastered the difficulty sufficiently to converse without embarrassment, or to make myself clearly understood. The construction of their language was simple and easily understood, and in a short time I was able to read it with ease and to listen to it with enjoyment. Yet before this was accomplished, I had mingled among them for months, listening to a musical jargon of conversation that I could neither participate in nor understand. All that I could therefore discover about them during this time was by observation. This soon taught me that I was not in a seminary, in our acceptance of the term, but in a college of experimental science. The ladies, girls I had supposed them to be, were, in fact, women and mothers, and had reached an age that, with us, would be associated with decrepitude and wrinkles. They were all practical chemists, and their work was the preparation of food from the elements. No wonder that they possessed the suppleness and bloom of eternal youth, when the earthly matter and impurities that are ever present in our food were unknown to theirs. I also discovered that they obtained rain artificially when needed, by discharging vast quantities of electricity in the air. I discovered that they kept no cattle, nor animals of any kind for food or labor. I observed a universal practice of outdoor exercising, the aim seeming to be to develop the greatest capacity of lung or muscle. It was astonishing the amount of air a MIZORA lady could draw into her lungs. They called it their brain stimulant, and said that their faculties were more active after such exercise. In my country, a cup of strong coffee, or some other agreeable beverage, is usually taken into the stomach to invigorate or excite the mind. One thing I remarked as unusual among a people of such cultured taste, and that was the size of the ladies' waists. Of all that I measured, not one was less than 30 inches in circumference, and it was rare to meet with one that small. At first, I thought a waist that tapered from the armpits would be an added beauty, if only these ladies would be taught how to acquire it. But I lived long enough among them to look upon a tapering waist as a mild deformity. They considered a large waist a mark of beauty, as it gave a greater capacity of lung power, and they laid the greatest stress upon the size and health of the lungs. One little lady, not above 5 feet in height, I saw draw into her lungs 225 cubic inches of air, and smile proudly when she accomplished it. I measured 5 feet 5 inches in height, and with the greatest effort I could not make my lungs receive more than 200 cubic inches of air. In my own country, I had been called an unusually robust girl, and knew by comparison that I had a much larger and fuller chest than the average among women. I noticed with greater surprise than anything else had excited in me the marked absence of men. I wandered about the magnificent building without hindrance or surveillance. There was not a lock or bolt on any door in it. I frequented a vast gallery filled with paintings and statues of women, noble-looking women, but still nothing but women. Strangers came and went, but among the multitude of faces I met, I never saw a man's. In my own country, I had been accustomed to regard man as a vital necessity. He occupied all government offices and was the arbitrator of domestic life. It seemed, therefore, impossible to me for a country or government to survive without his assistance and advice. Besides, it was a country over which the heart of any man must yearn, however insensible he might be to beauty or female loveliness. Wealth was everywhere and abundant. The climate as delightful as the most fastidious could desire. The products of the orchards and gardens surpassed description. Bread came from the laboratory, and not from the soil by the sweat of the brow. Toil was unknown, the toil that we know, menial, degrading, and harassing. Science had been the magician that had done away all that. Science, so formidable and austere to our untutored minds, had been gracious to these fair beings and opened the door to nature's most occult secrets. The Greeks, in their highest art, never rivaled it, for here was a beauty of mind that no art can represent. They enhanced their physical charms with attractive costumes, often of extreme elegance. They wore gems that flashed a fortune as they passed. The rarest was of a pale rose color, translucent as the clearest water, and of a brilliancy exceeding the finest diamond. Their voices in song could only be equaled by a celestial choir. No dryad queen ever floated through the leafy aisles of her forest with more grace than they displayed in every movement. And all this was for feminine eyes alone, and they of the most enchanting loveliness. Their chief beauty appeared in a mobility of expression. It was the divine fire of thought that illumined every feature, which, while gazing upon the Aphrodite of Praxiteles, we must think was all that the matchless marble lacked. Emotion passed over their features like ripples over a stream. Their eyes were limpid wells of loveliness, where every impulse of their natures were betrayed without reserve. It would be paradise for a man. I made this observation to myself, and as secretly would I propound the question, why is he not here in lordly possession? In my world, man was regarded, or he had made himself regarded, as a superior being. He had constituted himself the government, the law, judge, jury, and executioner. He doled out reward or punishment as his conscience or judgment dictated. He was active and belligerent always in obtaining and keeping every good thing for himself. He was indispensable. Yet here was a nation of women doing without him, and practicing the arts and sciences far beyond the imagined pale of human knowledge and skill. Of their progress in science I will give some accounts hereafter. It is impossible to describe the feeling that took possession of me as months rolled by, and I saw the active employments of a prosperous people move smoothly and quietly along in the absence of masculine intelligence and wisdom. Cut off from all inquiry by my ignorance of their language, the singular absence of the male sex began to prey upon my imagination as a mystery. The more so after visiting a town at some distance, composed exclusively of schools and colleges for the youth of the country. Here I saw hundreds of children, and all of them were girls. Is it to be wondered at that the first inquiry I made was, where are the men? Chapter 4. To facilitate my progress in the language of MIZORA, I was sent to their national college. It was the greatest favor they could have conferred upon me, as it opened to me a wide field of knowledge. Their educational system was a peculiar one, and, as it was the chief interest of the country, I shall describe it before proceeding farther with this narrative. All institutions for instruction were public, as were also the books and other accessories. The state was the beneficent mother who furnished everything and required of her children only their time and application. Each pupil was compelled to attain a certain degree of excellence that I thought unreasonably high, after which she selected the science or vocation she felt most competent to master, and to that she then devoted herself. The salaries of teachers were larger than those of any other public position. The principal of the National College had an income that exceeded any royal one I had ever heard of, But as education was the paramount interest of MIZORA, I was not surprised at it. Their desire was to secure the finest talent for educational purposes, and as the highest honors and emoluments belonged to such a position, it could not be otherwise. To be a teacher in MIZORA was to be a person of consequence. They were its aristocracy. Every state had a free college provided for out of the state funds. In these colleges, every department of science, art, or mechanics was furnished with all the facilities for thorough instruction. All the expenses of a pupil, including board, clothing, and the necessary traveling fares, were defrayed by the state. I may here remark that all railroads are owned and controlled by the central government. The rates of transportation were fixed by law and were uniform throughout the country. The National College which I entered belonged to the general government. Here was taught the highest attainments in the arts and sciences, and all industries practiced in MIZORA. It contained the very cream of learning. There the scientist, the philosopher, and inventor found the means and appliances for study and investigation. There the artist and sculptor had their finest work, and often their studios. The principals and subordinate teachers and assistants were elected by popular vote. The state colleges were free to those of another state who might desire to enter them, for MIZORA was like one vast family. It was regarded as the duty of every citizen to lend all the aid and encouragement in her power to further the enlightenment of others, wisely knowing the benefits of such would accrue to her own and the general good. The National College was open to all applicants, irrespective of age, the only requirements being a previous training to enter upon so high a plane of mental culture. Every allurement was held out to the people to come and drink at the public fountain, where the cup was inviting and the waters sweet. For, said one of the leading instructors to me, education is the foundation of our moral elevation, our government, our happiness. Let us relax our efforts, or curtail the means and inducements to become educated, and we relax into ignorance and end in demoralization. We know the value of free education. It is frequently the case that the greatest minds are of slow development and manifest in the primary schools no marked ability. They often leave the schools unnoticed, and when time has awakened them to their mental needs, all they have to do is to apply to the college, pass an examination, and be admitted. If not prepared to enter the college, they could again attend the common schools. We realize, in its broadest sense, the ennobling influence of universal education. The higher the culture of a people, the more secure is their government and happiness. A prosperous people is always an educated one, and the freer the education, the wealthier they become. The preceptress of the National College was the leading scientist of the country. Her position was more exalted than any that wealth could have given her. In fact, while wealth had acknowledged advantages, it held a subordinate place in the estimation of the people. I never heard the expression very wealthy used as a recommendation of a person. It was always, she is a fine scholar, or mechanic, or artist, or musician. She excels in landscape gardening or domestic work. She is a first-class chemist, but never she is rich. The idea of a government assuming the responsibility of education, like a parent securing the interest of its children, was also new to me, and yet I confessed to myself the system might prove beneficial to other countries than MIZORA. In that world from whence I had so mysteriously emigrated, education was the privilege only of the rich, and in no country, however enlightened, was there a system of education that would reach all. Charitable institutions were restricted and benefited only a few. My heart beat with enthusiasm when I thought of the mission before me. And then I reflected that the philosophers of my world were but as children in progress compared to these, still traveling in grooves that had been worn and fixed for posterity by bygone ages of ignorance and narrow-mindedness. It would require courage and resolution, and more eloquence than I possessed, to persuade them out of these trodden paths. To be considered the privileged class was an active characteristic of human nature. Wealth and the powerful grip upon the people which the organizations of society and governments gave made it hereditary. Yet in this country, nothing was hereditary but the prosperity and happiness of the whole people. It was not a surprise to me that astronomy was an unknown science in MIZORA, as neither sun, moon, nor stars were visible there. The moon's pale beams never afford material for a blank line in poetry. Neither do scientific discussions rage on the formation of Saturn's rings or the spots on the sun. They knew they occupied a hollow sphere, bounded north and south by impassable oceans. Light was a property of the atmosphere. A circle of burning mist shot forth long streamers of light from the north, and a similar phenomena occurred in the south. The recitation of my geography lesson would have astonished a pupil from the outer world. They taught that a powerful current of electricity existed in the upper regions of the atmosphere. It was the origin of their atmospheric heat and light and their change of seasons. The latter appeared to me to coincide with those of the Arctic zone in one particular. The light of the sun during the Arctic summer is reflected by the atmosphere and produces that mellow, golden, rapturous light that hangs like a veil of enchantment over the land of MIZORA for 6 months in the year. It was followed by 6 months of the shifting iridescence of the aurora borealis. As the display of the aurora borealis originated and was most brilliant at what appeared to me to be the terminus of the pole, I believed it was caused by the meeting at that point of the two great electric currents of the earth, the one on its surface and the one known to the inhabitants of MIZORA. The heat produced by the meeting of two such powerful currents of electricity is, undoubtedly, the cause of the open polar sea. As the point of meeting is below the vision of the inhabitants of the Arctic regions, they see only the reflection of the aurora. Its gorgeous, brilliant, indescribable splendor is known only to the inhabitants of MIZORA. At the National College, where it is taught as a regular science, I witnessed the chemical production of bread and a preparation resembling meat. Agriculture in this wonderful land was a lost art. No one that I questioned had any knowledge of it. It had vanished in the dim past of their barbarism. With the exception of vegetables and fruit, which were raised in luscious perfection, their food came from the elements. A famine among such enlightened people was impossible, and scarcity was unknown. Food for the body and food for the mind were without price. It was owing to this that poverty was unknown to them, as well as disease. The absolute purity of all that they ate preserved an activity of vital power long exceeding our span of life. The length of their year, measured by the 2 seasons, was the same as ours, but the women who had marked 100 of them in their lifetime looked younger and fresher and were more supple of limb than myself, yet I had barely passed my 22nd year. I wrote out a careful description of the processes by which they converted food out of the valueless elements, valueless because of their abundance, and put it carefully away for use in my own country. There, drought or excessive rainfalls produced scarcity and sometimes famine. The struggle of the poor was for food, to the exclusion of all other interests. Many of them knew not what proper and health-giving nourishment was. But here in MIZORA, the daintiest morsels came from the chemist's laboratory, cheap as the earth under her feet. I now began to enjoy the advantages of conversation, which added greatly to my happiness and acquirements. I formed an intimate companionship with the daughter of the preceptress of the National College, and to her was addressed the questions I asked about things that impressed me. She was one of the most beautiful beings that it had been my lot to behold. Her eyes were dark, and her hair had a tinge as if it had stolen the golden edge of a ripe chestnut. Her beauty was a constant charm to me. The National College contained a large and well-filled gallery. Its pictures and statuary were varied, not confined to historical portraits and busts as was the one at the College of Experimental Science. Yet it possessed a number of portraits of women. Many of them were ideal in loveliness. This gallery also contained the masterpieces of their most celebrated sculptors. They were all studies of the female form. I am a connoisseur in art, and nothing that I had ever seen before could compare with these matchless marbles, bewitching in every delicate contour, alluring in softness, but grand and majestic in pose and expression. But I haunted this gallery for other reasons than its artistic attractions. I was searching for the portrait of a man, or something suggesting his presence. I searched in vain. Many of the paintings were on a peculiar transparent substance that gave to the subject a startlingly vivid effect. I afterward learned that they were imperishable, the material being a translucent adamant of their own manufacture. After a picture was painted upon it, another piece of adamant was cemented over it. Each day, as my acquaintance with the peculiar institutions and character of the inhabitants of MIZORA increased, my perplexity and a certain air of mystery about them increased with it. It was impossible for me not to feel for them a high degree of respect, admiration, and affection. They were ever gentle, tender, and kind to solicitude. To accuse them of mystery were a paradox, and yet they were a mystery. In conversation, manners, and habits, they were frank to singularity. It was just as common an occurrence for a poem to be read and commented on by its author as to hear it done by another. I have heard a poetess call attention to the beauties of her own production and receive praise or adverse criticism with the same charming urbanity. Ambition of the most intense earnestness was a natural characteristic, but was guided by a stern and inflexible justice. Envy and malice were unknown to them. It was, doubtless, owing to their elevated moral character that courts and legal proceedings had become unnecessary. If a discussion arose between parties involving a question of law, they repaired to the public library, where the statute books were kept, and looked up the matter themselves and settled it as the law directed. Should they fail to interpret the law alike, a third party was selected as referee, but accepted no pay. Indolence was as much a disgrace to them as is the lack of virtue to the women of my country. Hence, every citizen, no matter how wealthy, had some regular trade, business, or profession. I found those occupations we are accustomed to see accepted by the people of inferior birth and breeding were there filled by women of the highest social rank, refined in manner, and frequently of notable intellectual acquirements. It grew, or was the result of the custom of selecting whatever vocation they felt themselves competent to most worthily fill, and as no social favor or ignominy rested on any kind of labor, the whole community of MIZORA was one immense family of sisters who knew no distinction of birth or position among themselves. There were no paupers and no charities, either public or private, to be found in the country. The absence of poverty such as I knew existed in all civilized nations upon the face of the earth was largely owing to the cheapness of food. But there was one other consideration that bore vitally upon it. The dignity and necessity of labor was early and diligently impressed upon the mind. The preceptress said to me, "MIZORA is a land of industry. Nature has taught us the duty of work. Had some of us been born with minds fully matured, or did knowledge come to some as old age comes to all, we might think that a portion was intended to live without effort, but we are all born equal, and labor is assigned to all, and the one who seeks labor is wiser than the one who lets labor seek her." Citizens, I learned, were not restrained from accumulating vast wealth had they the desire and ability to do so, but custom imposed upon them the most honorable processes. If a citizen should be found guilty of questionable business transactions, she suffered banishment to a lonely island and the confiscation of her entire estate, both hereditary and acquired. The property confiscated went to the public schools in the town or city where she resided, but never was permitted to augment salaries. I discovered this in the statute books, but not in the memory of anyone living had it been found necessary to inflict such a punishment. "Our laws," said Wauna, "are simply established legal advice. No law can be so constructed as to fit every case so exactly that a criminal mind could not warp it into a dishonest use. But in a country like ours, where civilization has reached that state of enlightenment that needs no laws, we are simply guided by custom. The love of splendor and ornament was a pronounced characteristic of these strange people, but where gorgeous colors were used, they were always of rich quality. The humblest homes were exquisitely ornamented, and often displayed a luxury that, with us, would have been considered an evidence of wealth. They took the greatest delight in their beauty, and were exceedingly careful of it. A lovely face and delicate complexion, they averred, added to one's refinement. The art of applying an artificial bloom to the skin, which I had often seen practiced in my own country, appeared to be unknown to them. But everything savoring of deception was universally condemned. They made no concealment of the practice they resorted to for preserving their complexions, and so universal and effectual were they that women who, I was informed, had passed the age allotted to the grandmothers in my country, had the smooth brow and bloom of cheek that belongs to a more youthful period of life. There was, however, a distinction between youth and old age. The hair was permitted to whiten, but the delicate complexion of old age, with its exquisite coloring, excited in my mind as much admiration as astonishment. I cannot explain why I hesitated to press my first inquiry as to where the men were. I had put the question to Wauna one day, but she professed never to have heard of such beings. It silenced me for a time. Perhaps it is some extinct animal, she added naively. We have so many new things to study and investigate that we pay but little attention to ancient history. I bided my time and put the query in another form. Where is your other parent? She regarded me with innocent surprise. You talk strangely. I have but one parent. How could I have any more? You ought to have two. She laughed merrily. You have a queer way of jesting. I have but one mother, one adorable mother. How could I have two? And she laughed again. I saw that there was some mystery I could not unravel at present, and fearing to involve myself in some trouble, refrained from further questioning on the subject. I nevertheless kept a close observance of all that passed, and seized every opportunity to investigate a mystery that began to harass me with its strangeness. Soon after my conversation with Wauna, I attended an entertainment at which a great number of guests were present. It was a literary festival, and after the intellectual delicacies were disposed of, a banquet followed of more than royal munificence. Toasts were drunk, succeeded by music and dancing and all the joys of a festive occasion, yet none but women graced the scene. Is it strange, therefore, that I should have regarded with increasing astonishment and uneasiness a country in all respects alluring to the desires of man, yet found him not there in lordly possession? Beauty and intellect, wealth and industry, splendor and careful economy, nature's lofty and generous, gentle and loving. Why has not man claimed this for himself? Stay tuned for the next segment from MIZORA, A Prophecy by Mary E. Bradley. Please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. Keep in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, and recommend us to anyone you know who could use a quiet break or a little help falling asleep. Exploration Dreamland is produced, edited, and hosted by me, Sarah Vanzaley. A big thank you to Project Gutenberg for helping me find this and many other interesting publications. Thanks also to Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com for providing the theme music for this show. The title of this piece is Kalimba Relaxation Music, if you would like to visit his website to hear it in its entirety. Sweet dreams.